He held it in his home in those duffel bags for all those years, and then when they were going to have a big reunion, he took it all up to the university and gave it to them and heaved a big sigh of relief, because he only kept a little bit and some prints, and it's those that we have been looking at. And now that brings us to Apollo 14 and what, in fact, he preserved. This is a panorama from Apollo 14, which was commanded by Alan Shepard, first astronaut, very famous guy, the guy that John Kennedy apparently personally selected to be the astronaut who went on that Mercury suborbital hop back in 1961, just before the announcement of Apollo, and Ed Mitchell, who is a very famous astronaut now, who founded Noetics Institute of Science when he came back from the moon, who did the ESP experiment, remember, going between Earth and Moon to see if, rhyme cards could be transmitted telepathically. That wasn't actually on the approved NASA roster of experiments to do. Okay, this is a photograph of Schmidt on Apollo 17. The reason I have this photograph here is because I'm going to show you what we have now figured out in hindsight having to do with the helmet. The helmets, we've been told, those gold visored helmets, which don't allow you to see the astronauts' faces, so it could all be the same guy. We could have sent one guy to the moon over and over and over again, and no one would ever know, because you never see their face. Well, actually, during 17, Schmidt and Cernan actually rolled up this gold visor, and they were able to, you could actually see on the TV their real faces. So we know that they were also on the moon. Anyway, the reason we're told that the astronauts had to have gold visors is because the raw sunlight on the surface of the moon allows a lot of the ultraviolet to impinge directly. It's not absorbed by the Lexan plastic faceplate of the space helmet, and they would get awful, terrible sunburns, ultimately winding up with cancer or retinal burns or something really, really serious. They could die, they could have been incapacitated, so we're told that they basically had to wear this gold helmet to keep the bright, unfiltered sun on the lunar surface, the vacuum, no atmosphere surface of the moon, from ultimately killing them. This is a curve of visual response. In other words, if you measure the human eye response to light versus the wavelengths of the spectrum, from red to blue, from long waves to short waves, this is how it is very, very insensitive to deep red, rises to a peak sensitivity in the blue-green, then descends again, so that by the time you get to the ultraviolet, it's back to zero. So if you're going to see something in the sky above the moon, which scatters like air, because it's made of fine particles and it's rarely scattered sunlight, you need something that basically suppresses all of this visual response to where the sun is shining brightly and enhances the blue part of the spectrum. That's where this camera comes in, because the camera is basically a film camera. This was in the days before CCDs. And inside here, you've got a magazine on the back. You've got lenses, you've got motors, that basically change the film. Here's a close-up of the magazine. This is an actual Hasselblad magazine. 70 millimeter format, very large format. Each magazine could hold about 200 shots. So the astronaut, if I can go back a second, had the camera basically strapped to his chest. And he aimed it by simply moving his entire body, and there was no ground glass. You couldn't look down and actually see the picture. He basically aimed it, by developing a sense of where it was as part of his body, and had a wide enough field of view that you got stuff in the field of view. Okay. This is how the photographs were actually made in color. It was called reversal film. It was basically Ektachrome. With red, green, and blue sensitive layers, you put them together, and you produce a full color scene in the photo lab. It's an actual layered emulsion with something like 9 different layers, and there's filters in between, and the blue layers are on top, and you got red and green equivalent, although they're actually the opposite color. This is a photographic reference from NASA describing in exquisite detail everything you would ever want to know about the color photography during Apollo. It's available on the web. Remember, Google is your friend. So you simply Google NASA SP5099, and I guarantee you will find out more about the photography during Apollo than you ever wanted to know. Which brings us back to what they actually photographed. Because as part of Ken's stash, he had a bunch of prints when we met in 1995. And he took us down to his house. Jay and I went down. Do you remember that vivid day, Jay? Hello? Did Jay step out?
Yeah, I stepped out.
Okay. So we're losing them by attrition. We've lost David. Is David here? David Wilcock?
Stepped out.
Stepped out. Hi, Jay. We're discussing when we were invited down to Ken's house and we saw his secret stash. Oh, God, yes. That describes it, all right? It was like, you know, Jay and I had died and gone to heaven, and Paul, you know, St. Paul or St. Peter had basically said, oh, by the way, you know that Apollo mission stuff? You want to see all the photographs you didn't get to see? And we did, and this is one of them. This is AS-14 669301. The 14, of course, references Apollo 14. That's frame numbers and magazine numbers and all that. And you order this by going to the web, and we'll show you how to do that in a second. This is a scan of Ken's print, which, remember, he had preserved carefully in dark filing cabinets for 30 years. At that point, it was 30-some years. Never seen the light of day. Had not been touched by NASA for over 30 years. Safely out of their clutches and their whatever they've done to these pictures. So we're, you know, and then he says, you know, the magic words, would you like to borrow them? Like, what? So, of course, I took them back to Weehawken, which is where Enterprise was located in those days, and I put them on a circa 1995 scanner, and I scanned this thing, and I started doing things with gamma and contrast and, you know, light levels, basically intensity, and I turned up the gain. I mean, all I did was turn up the gain equivalent of, you know, turning up the volume on some kind of a sound system, and lo and behold, this is what popped out above that vacuum lunar scene. All kinds of stunning, amazing, regular, gridded geometry, including what was obviously a glass tower rising up behind Ed Mitchell, quietly putting up the TV camera, completely, apparently oblivious to what was arching overhead. Now, when I debated with Ed on Art Bell, I gave him the benefit of the doubt, because remember, I believe that the helmets were designed to screen out all the ultraviolet and the blue so the astronauts wouldn't fry. So I said to myself, okay, well, they couldn't see any of this stuff. It would have been invisible. They would have, I mean, we're talking something that has the consistency of cigarette smoke that's tens of miles away, if not more. And it's unlikely that it's so dim. Remember, I had to find it down in the black levels of the emulsion in the supposedly black, vacuum, dark lunar sky. It's unlikely, given what I was looking at in terms of numbers and light levels and intensities, that they could have possibly seen any of this stuff with the naked eye, certainly not through those helmets, or saw, or so I thought. And then I started doing some numbers. Before we get to the numbers, let me show you some details. So I did sectionals, and I had this print, and I could zoom in, you know, like 5,000 DPI and all this. So I did a sectional of this section right here.